Arrest in Jerusalem. Last week we have arrived together with Paul in Antioch, the places he initiated his last 3 missionary journeys. And although he received numerous warnings not to go to Jerusalem from there, regardless he decided to go and deliver all the financial help he has collected from the provinces and the believers there to the poor in Jerusalem. What happened in Jerusalem? This is the object of our thoughts this week.
We followed Paul through his missionary journeys, and we saw how multitudes of people, both Jewish and Gentiles, were opening their hearts and were entering into relationship with God. But we also saw an extreme resistance, not so much from the pagans, but from the keepers of the law and the temple. Paul's heart was attached and connected to his Jewish brothers. He wanted a united church, but he wasn't getting much help either. Yes, the Jerusalem Council took a decision and wrote a letter, but there wasn't much more. And it wasn't an easy mental, cultural, and spiritual change. Following the essence of the gospel and the directions to take care of and support each other, Paul brings help from the Gentiles to the poor in Jerusalem. Christianity by example. But it seems that the church leadership is more concerned about unity, but not causing much disturbance. So, should Paul just continue his work and not care, avoid the Jews? Should he close his eyes and just hope that time will take care of it? Well, he decided to face it heads on in Jerusalem.
And the first thing he does when he gets in Jerusalem is to meet with the church leaders. And he is warmly greeted by them. However, there is an issue at stake. While he was spreading the gospel in the provinces to the Gentiles, a word of him has come back to Jerusalem that he was ignoring the Jewish traditions regarding the temple and the holidays observances. And a small group, but strong group of Jewish defenders of the tradition has already questioned his credibility. It seems that wherever he went during his missions, he always encountered the opposition of Jewish fanatics. And although he managed to escape always, somehow, now he was in their city, on their territory, and he had to face the issue face to face. The question was, how should he has to maneuver in those stormy waters? And he decided to listen to the advice of his brothers and participate in one of their dear temple customs, and in this way silence somehow the complaint. What a mistake.
It's amazing how difficult it is to have honest conversations. It's not about real care for the issue, it's about the agenda. You can't just be pushing all the way only one side of the race issue, the gender issues, the political issues. There is another side too. And everyone screaming and distorting the other view doesn't lead to anything good. The Jewish point was that Paul was against the temple, against Moses. He was destroying everything sacred and dear. How could you argue against that? The Jewish news TV was making fact checks, bringing quotes, tapes. The perceptions were created. So some thought that maybe if the people could see Paul in the temple, participating in the ceremonies, sponsoring a ritual, that maybe they would see that, look, he respects it. Well, naive campaign strategy.
The apostle went one day to the temple in Jerusalem, and as part of his involvement of the custom of purification that he followed, there were some Jews there from the province of Asia who recognized him from back then when he was visited their places. They incited the crowd against him, and they were the Roman soldiers who arrested him as the provocateur of this big commotion. The apostle had already become popular in those provinces, and people remembered him from back then when he was visiting. They remembered also his liberal position on the temple observances and the holiday observances. and they couldn't stand him anymore. They wanted him arrested, and they wanted him killed again, as it happened many times before when he visited. It makes me think how some people are so closed to experience change in their lives that they would rather kill somebody just to silence this voice of inconvenience. And should I be surprised about that? Having in mind that Jesus was treated and killed the same way. History repeats itself, and how unfortunate.
It's not easy to make sense of all this from the side. And the Roman commander thought that Paul was actually some Egyptian terrorist. And looking at many religious interactions, we may get similar thoughts.
Just before being taken by the Roman commander to their fortress for interrogation, Paul inquires to speak to the same crowd that was coming after him. And for Paul, this was just another opportunity to set the record straight, to make it clear that what is the real story behind his actions. And remember, let's not forget that there was no TV, and there was no internet, there was no phones, or no press for that matter at that time. Everything that the regular Jew knew was what was broadcasted by the Jewish leaders, or what was passed from mouth to mouth. Somebody had to break this channel of information, and Paul makes an attempt by telling his personal story of how he met God and how he met their Messiah on the way to Damascus. And so far so good. Then he gets to the point that he is commissioned by God to go to the Gentiles and proclaim salvation to them too. And this is where the crowd gets really aggravated. Fully frustrated by what they have heard, they start throwing their clothes at him. They pick up dust and throw it at him too. They have proven once again that they have no tolerance whatsoever for any other nationality being recognized by God for salvation but them. It wasn't what God planned. It was their false belief that they're the keepers of the gates of heaven. And again, how unfortunate is that?
Paul was trying to explain that it's about God and His leadership. And that many times it may not be what we expect or what we have grown up understanding. But for the crowd, it was about predefined stereotypes. Moses versus Gentiles. And this is how most debates go, political, ethical, religious. But it seems that Paul have noticed that as he used a trick.
Yeah. Lastly, the apostle is brought in and stood up before the council of the Sanhedrin. The reason is that the Roman commander was looking for clarification from the Jews. Why is this man accused? And ironically, after all, the Roman commander doesn't get any good answer for it. What Paul does after being punched in his mouth under the high priest's command, he starts talking to the council of the Sanhedrin about himself being a Pharisee, one who believes in the resurrection of dead. And of course, this sways the whole discussion into a battle between Pharisees and Sadducees, instead of discussing Paul's disregard of the temple's traditions. We find nothing wrong in him, shout some of the Pharisees. The conflict gets so violent between Sadducees and Pharisees that the Roman commander commands his troop to go into the meeting and pull out by force Paul and bring him back to the barracks. So unfortunate. Again, God's news is strangled in people's battles, fights, and quarrels, and in a noisy, uncontrolled nonsense.
But Paul knew how to play some cards. They don't like it because I preach resurrection. Boom, now he has some defenders, making it Sadducees versus Pharisees. He also played his Roman citizenship card to gain some protection and more respect and also exposure. But this Paul disturbance thing was getting too much. And 40 men took a vow to kill him or to die by starvation, to not eat or drink until they get rid of him. So they organized a trap. But apparently, Paul had a sister and a nephew, which God used to prevent the plot.
The plot against Paul was big and deep, and it seemed unforgiving. Things have been only escalating in a negative direction for Paul so far, and he ended up arrested. And what is more sad is that every attempt that Paul made to speak has turned into uproar or rejection on behalf of the crowds and the Jewish leaders. He ends up in Caesarea in the courts of the governor Felix. God's providence delivers him, and he's about to start his last journey. About that, we will learn in our next lesson.